Hello, bootstrappers.
Hello, bootstrappers.
Hello,
Hi,
bootstrappers.
Okay, so this week we're talking with two entrepreneurs who have bought into MakeLab, and it's now their startup. And so they've bootstrapped it from a very small 3D printing shop up to profitable. They're beyond break even, and now they're going through that pain of trying to grow their business. And do you get capital? Do you not get capital? And so we're going to walk through a lot of that in this session.
Okay, I'm excited. So let's meet them. Could you, just for our viewers, can you give an overview of what problem you're solving, or like what it is you're offering?
Sure.
And then a little bit of some of the pitfalls or obstacles you've hit on the path so far.
Sure. So we're a 3D printing service company, 3D printing additive manufacturing. We're B2B, and we pretty much work with businesses to help them make stuff. Every business that has a physical product needs 3D printing. Why aren't they our customer? Well, because adoption rate is a huge problem in 3D printing, but our solution will solve that. Though our approach to service will onboard customers and keep them coming back. We work in three main categories of service offerings, I guess you can say. One is prototyping for product development. The next is visual models. So that could be anything that it's like a looks like model, a concept model, appearance model, something for live events, for meetings, to show a proof of concept, mainly in appearance. And then the last is bulk production. So we work with clients that they don't have to open up a mold for quantities of 10,000 or less, which can be super costly at that low volume. An example of that is Baked Ideas. They're a trendy Instagram company, but they do cookie cutters, and they do themed cookie cutters. So they need to iterate fast. To open up a mold for a cookie cutter that you're only going to use for 2 months is not worth it. So instead, they want to implement 3D printing. They've ordered with us before, they've been a client, and so now we're talking about deeper relationships. Some clients that fall under the prototyping realm, that is really the chunk of our volume. That's like Quip, BarkBox, there's like NVIDIA, anyone who's doing product development. And we also work with design firms. The visual model, that is more along the lines of like marketing and creative agencies. So we'll do things for ad agencies like Wyden and Kennedy, Momentum Worldwide. We did something for Chick-fil-A, which was really cool. It was like for their a holiday pop-up that they had right before COVID hit. It was around the theme of time. And then also Judith Lieber, that's another high fashion like accessories brand that we work with, and we print for them like looks like models that they then use for photo shoots while they're actually making the mold and making the product. I don't know where they
got it.
Presumably overseas, but they need something quick so they can promote the thing and put it on the website, do that whole spiel. So that's where we step in.
Okay, what was your a couple of first early successes or early adopters? Like who were the first to jump on board?
It's interesting because while we're a really small business, we've had big traction with the big name clients. So a few are like Quip and BarkBox. Those were very early on. They just came in through our contact form and found us organically. Another is Oath, now Verizon Digital Media Services. So they were making like branded objects for each of their like office locations around the globe. And so we stepped in and helped them bring it to life. And it started from a really flat 2D image, just one view, front view, and we basically 3D modeled it. There was a little bit of design that goes into there and a little bit of engineering for 3D printing. We printed it out in full color, and we made it so that they can just pop it on the wall.
What is one of your first obstacles that was just like in your face and then you overcame it?
On the client side of things, Oath was definitely stretched us. It was our first really, really big demanding client. A lot of things that needed to happen in order to bring that project to fruition. And so we needed to really get set up on our end to be able to handle that alongside our regular just 3D printing services.
But you guys had to teach yourself all about 3D printing. It's not like you started off being experts, right?
Right.
Right.
I forgot that portion. So we're industrial designers by trade. I had access to 3D printers while I was in Pratt. I went to Pratt from 2010 to 2014, but I actually never used the thing because it seemed so intimidating. I didn't know like how to do it, and I didn't have time to learn, so I just didn't. It would have made my life incredibly easier in school. Probably would have gotten a little bit more sleep. Manny learned it, I think, maybe a year before.
Yeah, well,
A year before.
I've been a model maker for a really long time. So I've been doing stuff the traditional way forever. Everywhere I worked, I had to make stuff. I had to make things look real, from tiny to giant things. So as soon as the technology caught my eye, I knew there was something about this that I needed to find out. And the more I learned about it, I just thought, wow, this is the future. This is how we're going to be making things. I mean, early on, I got it. So I was trying to get my hands on one of them as soon as I could. So when we started designing for people, we were consulting. We just thought, we need to start 3D printing stuff. We tried. That's when we tried Shapeways. We tried all, but there was this disconnection, and so we said, why don't we just buy a 3D printer and teach ourselves? And we were doing it great. The technology wasn't that. It was very finicky and not there yet. So we had a lot of problems. It just didn't work out. So we ended up sending it back out into the world, getting another service. This time we went with the little guy, and that was like, long story short. We found a little guy. We fell in love with them. They loved us. We ended up acquiring them, and this is how we ended up. Yeah, we didn't have the time to really learn everything about it back then. It wasn't until we acquired that business that we were just thrown headfirst into this whole technology, and we had to learn it.
And I think being industrial designers, like, we're trained to apply design thinking to pretty much everything, to all types of problem solving. So the way we approached MakeLab was very similar. We took design thinking and applied it to business. We didn't know how the operations needed to work. There was no training guide. There was no manual. This was a guy and his wife running maybe 10 3D printers and not maximizing them either. They were just running. So when we came in, we definitely flubbed a lot of projects during that learning process. Thankfully, that painful learning process only lasted for like maybe 2 or 3 months until we really started understanding the needs of the workflow and where we wanted this to go. So then we honed in on operations for about the next year and a half. It was like a sprint to find different solutions to make things easier. So how do we stay organized? How do we create a file naming system? Like, how do we expand to, one tech running this to 2 techs running this? Can we delegate work? It's just building that whole system up was the main focus.
And it was a learn as you go.
When we had the 3D printer, I actually never 3D printed. That was all Manny, because I still didn't want to touch the thing.
I bought one of the first Maker bots, and it crushed my 3D printing dreams. I mean, I literally spent months trying to put it together. It never worked well. I was so excited, and I ended up so pissed off by the end of it that I haven't gone back, and I find that technology fascinating. I'm hoping, as we're doing this YouTube channel, we get to circle back and do some 3D printing, because I think it could be fun.
Yeah.
It's hard. Like, it's not as simple as you would think it would be.
It's simpler these days. I will say that, because even before the printer that we got to use, you had the printer bot, which was a MakerBot competitor, but same thing. It came in wood panels.
Never got to.
Oh, ooh.
Yeah. Never got it to work. It was when it meant to go forward, it would go backwards. So we just
I'm pretty sure it was a half human error, half their.
Yeah. I think we switched the motors. I think it was really that simple.
Yeah, it was
So
What kind of progress have you guys made? I mean, kind of fill me in. It's been over a month.
I know.
Mm-hmm.
So we've pitched 10 pitches. We've also made 10 revisions, but we finally nailed down our VC story. So we have, I feel like the one we walked you through was just so product focused, but we've really learned how to really communicate our business, our brand, our growth potential, and everything from a VC perspective. And we figured out our growth strategy and the software aspect that we spoke about last time.
Eve and I both pitched venture capital. The funny thing is it feels harsh when they give you feedback, but actually a lot of it ends up being true.
Yeah.
They're just pointing out, here are the things that are going to be hard based on all the other things I've seen and done. Where did they think this was going to be difficult?
Massive and fast growth. That's what they thought. That was more feedback from like the software VCs that maybe are a little intimidated by hardware and service. We didn't exactly get that feedback from everyone, but that was the common theme amongst like the software VCs.
Well, they're used to a zero cost of copying software. Yes, in theory that can spell. And it's so funny because I'm from Arkansas, and of course our most famous startup is Walmart.
Yeah.
And so anytime anyone gives me crap about how does something scale, and I'm like, well, they scale.
Yeah.
It's doable. It's a different kind of idea though.
We also got questions about proprietary software, but to our defense, again, I mean, to play devil's advocate, Airbnb and Uber both do not have proprietary software. It's more the culmination of their infrastructures that makes them unique and uncopyable. You would have to copy everything.
We're kind of like in the same position, really.
Yeah.
Although I see proprietary software and even hardware in terms of
Yes.
the automation system that we have in mind to run these prints automatically.
Yeah.
So that it's just that's not, we don't have that in hand.
See, I find the proprietary software thing to kind of be BS too, because does Disney have proprietary? No, they have a brand. I mean, so you can build a brand that stands for something, and people will buy from you, even if they could get the same thing down the street because they don't like the brand.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, we did. So I had an internet security company, and we focused on vulnerability management and scanning. And our early feedback was proprietary software, and we did do proprietary software. And son of a bitch, if three of our biggest competitors didn't just take an open source off the shelf, put a brand and service around it, and they shaved off a lot of time by not investing in the bake from scratch stuff.
Right.
So
That's great that you say that.
brings us to our next point. That's exactly what we plan on doing. So the good thing about the 3D printing industry, there you have the corporations like 3D Systems and Stratasys, and they like to keep everything closed. But then you also have the maker side, and the maker side is full of engineers and developers that love to just innovate and solve problems, and they want to share it. So we actually found something that's a great head start for what we need. So to break it down in software, we need a front end, which is the e-commerce portion. We need a CRM and an ERP. All of these things have been done before by many companies. It's just marrying it and integrating it to our machines and our workflows. We found someone who got a head start on the ERP section. So that's production management and schedule. He did this out of his own volition on his own, moonlighted it. It's called OptoFarm, based off of open source software. And so we're trying to work with him and us direct it, not going the CTO route, because we're not ready to let go of the control just yet, because everything's still formative. So we're going to direct it. We know what we need. We've architected all the steps, know what features we want, know our workflow the most, and we just need a programmer to do it. He has some ideas as well. So that's kind of the new development in the software component.
He's already developed the meat of it, so it's
Yes.
more of a
Just adding a little bit.
adding things here and there to make it custom to our flow.
That's kind of our development on that forefront. In the meantime, that will take, I predict, as soon as we get started, 3 to 6 months to get maybe 1 or 2 versions of the MVP. So in the meantime, we still need something that works for us while we scale, right?
Right.
So reaching out to our current software solution and trying to get them to basically do better, because it's very buggy and unworkable, and that's prevented us from scaling massively up until now. Otherwise, we would have done it. So we're trying to get them to move for the next 6 to 8 months just to hold us over. And we also, on the growth forefront, by adding in that SaaS component, we're able to really dig into deep integrations and relationships with giant organizations, whether it's a design firm that prototypes a crap ton and they don't want to really invest in machines at all. They just want design. They don't want to deal with it. And also schools, design schools and engineering schools are huge. And also an alumni, they go out into the world. And so the jobs that they work at, they become our customers. They continue being our customers.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, what questions do you have that we can give you feedback on or help you? Is there something you're stuck on, or where can we be helpful?
Well, one was the software part, because and you kind of answered that one. We weren't sure if we should stick with what the software we use now, which is a third party, and maybe try to acquire them later, or pay for a bigger subscription fee,
A higher
some sort
tier
of premium service, so they can just develop it just for us, or start from scratch. I think that middle way where you said, where you find someone, don't start from scratch, find something that's already in development and then work from there, was one of our options. We just weren't sure.
If the current guys are buggy,
Right.
that's probably more about how they do software. I always say, if telling people to do things better work, we live in a perfect world, because I would be in perfect health you can say, okay, well, don't make buggy software. Well, that's a culture.
Yeah.
Software development. Eva, I mean, you guys integrated a bunch of open source stuff. I mean, how did that work?
It worked really great, and I can give you some looking backwards. As much as so, you can use open source like no problem. It's easier. It's a lot easier if you wrap it in a shell to keep it modular. What you don't want is at the end of like 3 years or whatever to have open source software seeping through.
Gotcha.
You want to have like if you use open source, you want to have it kind of in a box.
Gotcha.
So that if for some reason in the future you do want to acquire another company, it's easier to unplug one and plug in the next one.
Gotcha.
But you have to go through all of your code and comb through it. It's gonna you're oftentimes the decision becomes easier to stay with something that sucks rather than to go through the pain of that improvement. The other issue that we ran into is that all of the open source software can have a variety of different license types.
Oh yeah.
And when like if you get down to the point in the road where someone is trying to acquire you, that becomes a very intensive point of scrutiny. And so again, you can use it, keep it modular, and in as much as possible, what would have saved us a lot of time is if we just simply had a spreadsheet that said, this is the software, this is the license type, here's the interface point. That way, when we replaced it, it would be easier. Or when we went through due diligence, it would have been.
Yeah, because in due diligence, I mean, it was like, I thought your head was going to explode trying to get through all that licensing stuff.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. That's a very good point.
What business was this? What was it?
It was Critical Watch. We did enterprise level vulnerability management.
So it was heavy duty stuff. I mean, it was gnarly software. So the thing that can keep that separated is write it as an API.
Mm-hmm.
On your side, go, well, I want to accomplish X, and that's the function call. And then behind that function call, you can plug in the open source piece. But meanwhile, if you need to plug in something else to do the same function, you're not rewriting everything past the API call.
Gotcha.
Nice.
Gotcha.
Yes.
That makes the way that I was thinking about it before, and forgive me for my extremely simplified metaphor, but our dog doesn't like to go number 2 in just one spot. Instead, he likes to go in multiple spots. So if you were to ever backtrack instead of find,
It's a perfect metaphor.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it's great. Especially if like your dog's out at night, right? And you're like, oh.
Well, you wouldn't want to build that into the wall. I mean, you
Yeah.
want to be able to pull it out and put something else in place, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it's a way of writing the software that it's a rookie mistake. Like I've made that mistake. I mean, even at One and Only, we eventually created an API in between all of our services because you never knew when you wanted to change out what provided the ads or what provided this, that, or the other. And if you don't do that, the amount of work it takes, it's like trying to change the wheels on a car as you go down the road. It's horrible.
Exactly.
From a thought process, there's a really awesome benefit it gives you. If you're in control of this is the workflow that you need, and you can look and say, what is our current bottleneck? What is our current point of constriction? Then you can plug in good enough stuff everywhere else and address just the constriction point. And then as that constriction point gets solved and another place becomes the place of constriction, then you can go over there and address that. And if it's modular like that, you can unplug the piece that's no longer working good enough and put a new one in or expand the capacity there.
I love that because that is our whole thing. We like everything to be modular. Like we like everything on wheels so you can move it around. We like everything we do from physical to digital.
Software will be the same thing.
I'm finding the way you're speaking about it is very similar to how I 3D model when I used to 3D model more, right? Like I can go into SolidWorks, it keeps a history, or into NetFab, or I can make changes and just plow through and get it done fast. Mm-hmm. Or I can link things properly so that if I change out an element, the whole model doesn't break and I have to. It's the same concept.
Yeah.
Concept. Mm-hmm. How do you group things? How do you link things? How do you refer to things?
So who's going to take on the job of kind of making sure that architecture gets done right while plugging in the pieces? Because that's going to be the major, either it'll make it easier and you'll make a lot of progress, or it's going to be horrible and you're going to trip over yourself constantly. depending on how you do it.
It's going to be me. I have some learning to do, but I already think in this way, and I pick up code pretty easily. I learned some, I don't know if I can compare this to that, but I picked up website development.
It's very similar, all of it.
Exactly. It uses the same concepts and the same, yeah.
I'll make one recommendation. I love Eva's take on it. I'll find out if she agrees with me by asking the question. Eva, what single book revolutionized how we build software?
Code Complete.
Yeah. If you talk to any of the technical people, because we all had to teach ourselves on the job, Eva was an anthropologist.
Yeah, I was an archaeologist.
Hey.
Yeah.
My God. See, it's all possible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Our other big coder was an English writer, Kevin Mitchell.
Wow.
And I was an industrial engineer, and pretty much every one of us, we all taught each other how to do this. And that book, that book was probably one of the turning points where we went, oh, this is what we're supposed to be doing.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And Christina, to what your point, it's the thought process is the most important piece, like thinking about it the right way. And then you can learn the skill needed at each element at the time you need it.
Right.
And Code Complete, really, I don't know that it has a lot of code in it, but it's about how to think about developing it.
Mm.
Like one of the big tips, and it's important today, name things right so that, 6 months from now, you look at it and you go, what the hell does this thing do?
Rather than, what was I smoking?
It's honestly, it's interesting that you bring up the naming thing, because we handle so many files here. And so we've set up a way to name files in the folders so we know. So customer history is baked into our files, and you can grab the information at each point. It's so simple. It's just renaming stuff, but it follows that naming convention. I think is one of the key points to building software. I could be wrong, but it seems like.
No, it really is. And so the book just kind of breaks down all the things that I think you would have learned if you went to software engineering school. I don't know that they teach it, but it was just incredibly easy to read, and really almost became the Bible. Like we got everyone to read it, and then we all started kind of coding that way, and things just really took off from that point forward.
It's amazing. I was taking notes, and I have it, and I wrote the name of the book in like size 48. So it's like right there.
Eva, do you remember anything else that was kind of turning points as we tried to get better at this?
Being able to visualize in a simple way the architecture. And then you could always drill in, and it gets really complex really quickly, but so that you could, in conversation, be pointing to the same thing verbally.
And the other good thing about open source that can't be underestimated, because like, for instance, we built our first site on ASP, even before it was ASP.NET on Microsoft. They actually had a memory leak in their string handling functions.
Mm.
And I could have, if it had been open source, I would have tracked down that damn thing, because it caused us more problem issue that they never effing fixed.
Yeah.
As long as I was there. And the ability to look at the raw code if you have to or pay someone to, it's go. Did you guys run any of that, Eva, when you were doing the scanning stuff?
Yeah, actually, and we did fix stuff because we had some open source stuff plugged in.
So do you have any more questions for us that we could help you with on your journey here?
I always have questions about balance, especially at the seed stage. As a founder, how do you balance building, pitching, managing? Like, of course we're going to hire, but it's still quite a lot all at once.
I thought I was going to have a nervous breakdown in that period where it wasn't so bad when we weren't successful, because you're just working on it. Like, you just work on it. It's no big deal. There comes a point where you are successful enough that the workload goes through the roof, and yet you're not successful enough to hire everyone to do it. Mm. That, I think, is where a lot of businesses fail. I mean, you can fail if there's no demand, and that's really, terrible and sad. But then there's that lift off where the plane starts lifting off, but you're not up in the sky yet. It was horrible. You remember my mood during that, Eva. I mean, it was pretty bad.
Nice.
All is forgiven.
Because you're at that point, right? It's starting to work.
Yeah.
You're just not big enough to have a person to do each of the jobs that needs to be done. The one thing that I will say is that no matter how much pressure there is to do it in a certain amount of time, your time scale is so much longer than you realize, because it's not like someone's going to run in, Starbucks isn't going to come right next to your little coffee shop and put you out of. There's all this internal pressure on, I got to do it before someone else does it. And it ends up being a marathon. I mean, Eva, you went.
Yeah, I got a lot of memories. So the first part of your question about how to balance, you're in the middle of building it and trying to raise money.
Yeah.
To me, water the business first. It's you have more certainty in the business and more control over being able to create revenue and manage growth, and you have less control over whether somebody's going to be delighted by your idea or not. That might happen. If it does and it fits your model and that works, that's great. But if you put all of your eggs in the basket you don't control, to me that's more risk and higher anxiety. Yeah. For like being overwhelmed with how much work there is to do and there's not enough people to do it. Get really good at filtering out the cries of the damned. Like everybody always wants. And so the more you can develop a sense of clarity around prioritization, like true prioritization. I mean, when we first were selling, what we wanted was to have everything built. But what we needed, and we finally realized, was we needed to make some sales, even if it meant late at night, Nelson was up actually doing the vulnerability testing and I was up writing the report. Because what the business needed was the subscriptions. Once we got to subscriptions, we could then focus on the automation.
Right.
And so it's about sequence.
Right.
In a lot of ways.
Right.
In sequencing the automation, because at One and Only, we definitely had that cries of the damn metaphor, because it would always be like, I can hear them, they're way over there, but you can't fix everything at one time.
Right.
We were an industrial engineer, accountant. We had a lot of analytical people. So we were ruthless about the sequence in automating, because there simply was not enough resources to do all the work to automate at one time. It just was not going to happen. You had to ignore a lot of things that were broken. I mean, some of my worst experiences was when my wife was doing customer email, because all day long I would be there trying to fix the crap that was wrong with the site. And I would come home and all she had to talk about was everything I hadn't fixed that day, because those were the emails that were coming in. And it was horrible.
That's when I got hired.
Yeah. And so I just, because you just can't fix it all. Like, it's just not possible. And so, yeah, you have to really selectively listen based on what delivers the most value the next 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks.
Okay, here's another thing that we learned. As we grew, we had relationships with some pretty big gorillas, and they basically determined a really large percentage of our revenue. So we cared a lot, and we really wanted to, they asked for something we wanted to deliver. When we learned it was okay to ask and inquire about a different timeline, we created more breathing space, because often they would bring something to us and we would make assumptions about the priority, and sometimes it was that high of a priority, but sometimes it could wait a month or it could be delayed out. And so as long as there was communication about that, we could still deliver and knock their socks off, but we didn't have to burn out back at the office.
So don't just prioritize your main customers just try to break it down to each project.
And ask them, just get really, you could hallucinate what their timeline is.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think we've done that. Again,
Well, because you want to do a good job. So it's a natural thing to absolutely, yes. And there's space for questions, especially given what you're describing, that there is in the larger companies, there's a big need.
So in 2018, we have a story. Oath was that client for us. They came through the door after 8 months of being in operation as MakeLab. So we were new entrepreneurs, new to 3D printing ourselves, new managers, new bosses, new business, new everything. So we ended up altering what we offered to accommodate that project in hopes of expanding to do more like projects. What we learned is that, that didn't work, one. the contract fell through, and what we were left with was a big operational mess to clean up. So we ended up shutting down the shop and stop offering that, which was the best decision, because then we were able to scale what can actually be automated rather than this manual shop experience.
Basically,
and service.
Yeah, it was a finishing shop that we opened up just to do
custom fabrication. And we definitely fell into that trap. But what happened in the meantime, before we made that difficult decision, was we were like, let's try to sell this to other clients. But what we found out is that it's an entirely different sales process.
Yeah.
So we were so small, and it was that situation where we were doing well. We were financially, which is great in less than 1 year of business. But operationally, we still couldn't hire someone else to be able to handle that workflow.
And putting a dollar amount on automation is really important, because one way of automating it is to hire a human being at $10, $15, $20 an hour. And that is automation, because you are not doing it. We would quantify at what point it was worth our engineer's time, meaning me, because there's only one me, and then there was only four me's, and then there was only, there were only so many people that could code in the company. And we really had to set priorities. I mean, Eva, how did you prioritize? I mean, because they had a much tougher automation job with all this scanning stuff. How did you guys prioritize it?
Biggest example is we had one of our early large adopters wanted to, they wanted a feature set we didn't have. But a lot of what we did have also helped. So what we did was basically negotiated a smaller contract. What they wanted was eventually going to be, in our mind, like a $30,000 a month contract. Later, it ended up being even larger, but that was as big as we could dream at that time. So what we did was we said, will you start now with what we have, with a smaller set? So we got a $5,000 a month contract, and they started using our current offering. And we used that $5,000 a month to supplement bringing in another engineer, because we couldn't at that point balance what we were doing and all the additional work in the timeline that they really needed. So that was one way we did it.
That's interesting, because I feel like there's a lot of pressure as a new business owner, and we definitely felt this too, to either say yes or no, and that's it. Yeah. But not to ask for more things and really think about, the long term of how you're going to work and make this work for the long term. It's like such short-sighted thinking, and we definitely made that mistake. That's a good point.
If you give them a path to what they want eventually, a lot of people will be patient with you.
We got better at saying, yes, and this is what it will take.
Yes, that's so important. Yes, and.
Yes, and this is what it will take. Yes, and this is what it would look like. Yes, and this is what we would need to make it happen. So you can still say the yes. You can still definitely be in that yes relationship and allow them to help you get them what they want.
Right.
Because if it's a larger company talking to a smaller company, they really want something.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or they would have just ordered it from the no risk channel.
Control expectations from the beginning.
Yeah, and give them a voice in helping you find that path.
Mm.
So you can say yes, and this is what we need. How can we get there? And if they help design the solution that works for both of you, then they're actually more invested.
And if they want it bad enough, they'll pay you to hire the engineer to build it. Because they don't want to be if they wanted to be the experts, they'd be building their own inside shop. So they don't want to do that. That's why they're talking to you. But that doesn't mean that you can't ask for the resources to make it happen.
Which is where that exactly is where we messed up back in 2018. We could have, because a big company coming for extremely custom objects with that close relationship, that is actually really difficult to get, especially when you're that large, right? So we definitely had a lot more negotiating power than I think we realized at the time.
And, the big early lessons, like those big epic lessons, like if you get those in early, then that's really good.
Fail fast, right?
Well, fail fast. And also you learned that maybe the path that you can't automate is not the path for you. That's good.
I would say that was the biggest takeaway. Well, actually in 2019. So that's when we tripled our 3D printing service, and we tripled our volume and revenue, which was insane. So that was validation that we made the right choice.
That's right.
Yeah.
We learned what to focus on. We learned not to put all our eggs in one basket, not to let another business run our business. And
right.
Don't say
valuable lessons.
Yeah. Very valuable. Very valuable.
Well, any other questions while we're here? And And what do you think the next milestone? Does it make sense to touch base like this? I mean, do you want to?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
It's extremely helpful. Just even talking through some things. I mean, being an entrepreneur, being a founder, it can be so insular, and you really silo yourself into your own network, especially if you're juggling multiple things. So for us, it's always really like it seems so simple just to like have a conversation and bounce ideas off and get some guidance and hear about your guys' experience. But like we've found that whenever we do that and whenever we reach out for help like that, it's just incredibly like those are the moments for us that really help us decide what's next.
Especially now that networking has been kind of catered to online, and we can't really do what we used to do. We were like network, even though women in 3D printing, weekly events, and meet new people and talk about stuff. Like it's been really hard. They used to help a lot.
Well, it's exciting for me. I'm going to say it's for us because just being in service of helping other entrepreneurs, like as they get on their path, is exciting. And then you put 3D printing on top of it, which is like really where I think a lot of things are going. And then it's cool because we also get insight into that journey in particular. So,
well, thanks, guys, and I look forward to reconnecting in a month or whatever makes sense. Eva, any last words there?
No, I'm just excited to be along for the ride.
Thanks for your time, both of you. This is always like so great and hard to find, And so
and really excited about what you're up to.
We'll keep you posted.